Japan, 1945. Allied prisoners of war are released. And the true story of 1,400 Canadian prisoners emerges. Among them is 26-year-old Alfred Babin. Alfred Babin was a young volunteer captured at Hong Kong and spent 4 years as a prisoner of the Japanese.
One morning we got up and there were no guards. Nobody was in the guardhouse. Gates were wide open. So we just took over. There were so many dying over a period of time. Like we lost, I think it was around 75 in our camp. But they died from sickness and overwork. The coal gang was, I guess, the worst one. The cars, I suppose they would hold half a ton, somewhere around there. And you had to push these around. There was an incident there where we were in a working party in the coal yards. And one of the Canadians, he was a very thin, very sick actually, but they forced him to go on the work party. And he got there and he couldn't do the work. And there was a Japanese and he started to beat this Canadian because he wasn't doing his work. And it looks as if he went out of control. And he just beat the fellow he was almost senseless. 2 or 3 days later, the Canadian died. We had 1 cup of rice, a level cup. Everybody got the same. But the rice was full of maggots, which was hard to take at first, but eventually we just loved it. It's a hunger that's very hard to describe because it's your whole being, really, that is crying out for food. And during the day, you're just looking for anything to eat. And then at night, when you go to bed, you dream about food. So it's really something that's with you 24 hours a day. But none of us would have lasted much longer, really.
This is Yokohama War Cemetery in Japan, and it's the most beautiful Commonwealth War Grave cemetery in the world. There are 1,500 Commonwealth servicemen buried here within the confines of this beautiful park. But its beauty masks the fact that these men died horrible, lingering deaths at the hands of the Japanese. The cemetery itself is broken into sections based on nationality, and this one is the Canadian section. The Canadian section contains 136 graves of Canadian prisoners of war who died here in Japan. They're all men captured in Hong Kong in 1941 who were transported to Japan to serve as slave laborers. They were treated with such brutality by the Japanese that they died of malnutrition, they died of disease, and many were just worked to death. Beatings were a standard part of the daily life for these people, and they shrunk to weights of 70 to 90 pounds. One of the saddest stories is one of the ones over here. This is the grave of Rifleman James Mortimer of the Royal Rifles of Canada. He died on March 7, 1944. Mortimer was like all the men. They were starving to death. They were eating grasshoppers or frogs or anything they could find. They were dying. And one day he took a chance and he stole a can of salmon from a Japanese worker, and he was caught. And for that crime, he was tied to a post in the middle of winter with just his pants and his shirt on and left overnight, and then beaten for half an hour later on. And of course, he succumbed shortly to his beatings. And his family has put this inscription here. And it says, "He was loved by all who knew him."
1945. Canadians return home after 6 long years to their families and their lives, interrupted by war. More than 1 million Canadians served, and over 40,000 died on the road to victory.
The Second World War was one of the few wars in history that had to be fought. And when you visit cemeteries like this and you see the number of people that came forward to fight not for themselves but for others, it is truly an impressive feature of human nature. As a Canadian, to know that we were never threatened, and yet over 1 million Canadians came forward to stop the tyranny that was threatening the world, just fills me with a sense of pride that I cannot explain. When I come to a cemetery like this, the first thing I notice is the courage and devotion of the men who are buried here. And I have to ask myself the question whether I would have that courage, that devotion, if I could be as true to a cause as these men were. And I sort of hope I never find out.